The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Okay, and we're live. Thank you all for letting me know. I can see in the chat. I'm not sure exactly why that happened. Everything's set up correct. We reset it. It's working now. So, June 26th, Friday, 2020. Thank you for joining me today. Today is going to be kind of a frustrating discussion. Something that I think is definitely what we saw coming, but definitely not something that I think is a foregone conclusion just yet. And that, of course, is the lockdown number 2, pandemic number 2. That's what's all coming our way now. And that's what we've been saying. And as I said a moment ago before you couldn't hear me, not so much of an I told you so moment, because I think more people are fighting against this and see what this is than you actually might realize. Far more than I think most people would accept today. We're hearing this fringe of people as the majority, right? You get the fringe of the Fox and CNNs, and they lump it together and they force it at you as some kind of mainstream media consensus, in the two-party paradigm, when in reality, I truly believe that most people, whether they like to admit it or not, see what's happening to one degree or another. Doesn't mean they have the exact same view as you do, but believe me, people are seeing through this. Now, today is going to be about how that's happening. Lockdown 2 is coming your way. It's happening on different places around the country. And guess what, guys? As much as you're seeing different levels of resistance and different levels of that type of lockdown, it's being allowed across the board. Now, whether we're talking about the federal involvement, the Trump administration involvement in suggesting that we go along with whatever's happening in the state, or however you want to look at it, if you're talking about a president or whoever, and understand, this is not about Trump, it's about whoever's in that position. Whoever the president may be, if you believe that person believes in the Constitution and believes that it's worth fighting for, then this wouldn't be happening right now. You can't pretend that game where, oh God, it's the governor's choice. The president can't do it. And of course, in any other circumstance than ever so far in his presidency that he's wanted to do something and there was some kind of legal barrier, who cares about that? We'll just play the game of politics and say that Article 2 and nonsense and whatever else. The point is, if he wanted to, he could step in and do whatever he wants right now to stop that from happening. Now, maybe actions that I wouldn't agree with or wouldn't be legal. He's done that already before. So was Obama and so was Bush. The point is, this is a bipartisan drive to create what we're in. And it's whether it's going to become lockdown 2 or segue into the election or become some new variation of all of it together, some new, racial mix and spin and the whole thing. It is all driving towards the same exact outcomes. Contact tracing, locking down, mass surveillance, artificial intelligence. All of it is coming your way based on all of these stories. How does that possibly make sense? Next week, it'll be another terrorist act. And guess what? Contact tracing, artificial intelligence, same thing. Oh, a mass shooting, contact tracing, artificial intelligence. They want these things to happen. And it's bipartisan, guys. We're going to go over a lot of this stuff today, whether it's about the vaccines or about any number of things that we need to realize. And I'm speaking to all of the partisan people out there, whether you're a Biden supporter or a Trump supporter, as if there's only two categories, to see that they're all doing it behind the scenes. And they want you to believe in the character of the person so you don't look at the actions and the facts. Even though reality, the character of either of them is you shouldn't be listening to. But we're going to go over Bill Gates' ties with a lot of really alarming stuff today as well, including a great article from Raul and Whitney again in regard to Bill Gates and you may have heard the genetically engineered mosquitoes that are being released in Florida. Of course, it's all kind of tied in with the same COVID-19 and the same really alarming stuff. And of course, in foreign policy and everything else. But weirdly enough, not weirdly, but I guess different than we've been doing it, I'm going to start off today with just something I want to share with you because this needs to be in people's minds. I'm tired of ending the show with something like this, but it needs to be the first thing you're thinking about. And today we're going to start with the COVID-19 discussion because I do also believe that is the most important thing happening in regard to how it affects our lives right this moment. But that doesn't mean that I feel that it's the most important thing in the world as it pertains to humanity, right? And this kind of thing is absolutely disconcerting, disgusting. This is Turkey bombing Iraq. People just walking around doing, playing in the water. The reason I'm pausing real quick is I'm worried I was mixing stories for the moment here really quickly. Because so you guys know, it's the reason that even would be a mistake between Syria and Iraq is because there's so much happening all the time that no one's talking about in regard to Israel bombing Syria and the U.S. bombing Iraq. It's all over the place. PKK, yeah, we're talking Syria and Iraq in general, but I'm frustrated now that I'm forgetting which exact town we're talking about. Iraq, okay, I was correct. I just wanted to be sure, right? It's important that you guys get the correct information. Now, point is, I'm going to show you this video. Now, this is not graphic at all, but I want you to understand what's happening here. This is, and it's just, I jumped the gun a little bit to make sure I wasn't incorrect, but this is real. This actually happened. Turkey bombed this area, okay? Here is a literal video taken from this person. It's his family while they're sitting here playing in the water and Turkey bombs. Just take a look when we watch. And that's where it ends. Now, I have no doubt that somebody died right there. Like, if we're going to pretend like the bomb landing an inch from her leg is not going to do something. This is a family. Now, we don't need to extrapolate. Understand, in my opinion, this is all we're seeing. There's a lot, because in my opinion, I think Turkey and the United States are completely backing the people they pretend that they're bombing. They're bombing Syrians. They're bombing Iraqis. They're bombing the people that don't allow them to destroy and overtake their countries. And within that, there may be militants that are fighting against the illegal invasion and bombing of their country, but these people are just simply people. Just like your neighbors, just like your family, just like anybody else that you look at as a normal human being. But for some reason, these people in other countries, we just, whatever. There's probably some other thing that makes that not what it looks like. I'm going to believe my government. It's crazy. But this is happening while they understand they're also dealing with whatever else is going on around the world, just like you, just like all the other countries. And yes, they get this small reprieve to go and play with their children, and Turkey bombs their family. But guess what? Guess what won't happen? You won't hear a word about this from the media. You won't hear a word about this from your own government because they don't care about it. And guess what? They know it happened. They just don't care. Now, imagine if this was happening and it was Assad that they could say was behind it. Imagine if this was happening and you could say that it was Maduro that did it. You know what would be happening. Whoa, God, it was Iran just did something that Israel claimed, and we'll report on it for 3 days. Oh, guess what? It turns out Israel lied about that, but who cares? We'll report it for 2 more days just in case. But you'll never hear about something like this, and it drives me crazy. Because it needs to show you who your government is, who those people are, who these people are. Understand as well, the Kurds, all of this stuff, there's a lot going on with this right now. In regard to Donald Trump, in regard to everything that's happening there. Apparently there's just some operation where a U.S.-led operation with a U.S. task force for terrorism that they claim is the Iraqi military. I highly doubt any of that is Iraqi military. They went in and actually attacked and arrested about 19 Kurdish militants that they say were part of Hayat Tahrir Hezbollah, which is PMU, which is the Iraqi military. The reality is, as I find out, they were arrested and they got released right back to the PMF, or PMU, whatever you want to call them. And that's because I argue that this was a U.S. operation and they do not have control in Iraq. But they're still in there murdering and attacking their own people. Right? The Iraqi military, the people that they pretend they're fighting for. Because they are trying to control. I didn't even mean to spend this long on this clip. It just drives me crazy. And this stuff is happening all around the world. And we need to realize that. Now, one more point I want to start with here is to realize that this is what they want you to be looking at. Of course, they don't want you to think about why we shouldn't be allowing a second lockdown to happen, even though those out there that don't think Trump's going to be a part of that. Black Lives Matter leader states, he says, if U.S., and this is going to be the only point that I'm going to get into even briefly touches on the concept of this racial divide that they're using against everybody, if U.S. doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down this system and replace it. That's what this person says, who is probably some CIA asset. This is treason, sedition, insurrection, Donald Trump says. Insurrection. What do you know? Oh, great. So it looks like the show is cutting in and out. Big surprise. Big surprise. Well, it looks like we're back. So sorry for those that just missed a moment of the show. As I'm, of course, how entertaining is it that we can't even, look, how long have I been on this show? We've been streaming for 12 minutes. I can't even get 12 minutes in. And because I'm pointing out something that I promise you they probably don't want you knowing about, we get a little bit of a glitch. Yeah, the fact that they're murdering people in Iraq, yeah, they probably don't want you knowing about that. The point is, guys, this is building. The reason he mentions insurrection is because of the Insurrection Act. There's a reason these things are being planted in your mind. And once the Insurrection Act is used, like I said, it will be, as I said in my tweet, the final nail in the coffin containing your constitutional rights. All under the guise that, well, we can't allow these crazy people to do what we're secretly telling them to do. Can't allow that. Got to shut it down. And in the process, any other protest, peripheral, tangential, anything else around it that may actually be organic and natural and, within their right, who cares? Those are all part of it now because it's a broad brush for everything. Now you can't protest anymore because these people, it's the same kind of idea. When I say these people, just for anybody out there, it's so funny. I was going to say, because these people went on and did something and I stopped, and then immediately the people are going to jump on that. It's so funny. The world in which we find ourselves is out of its mind. Out of its mind. These people, what I meant was the people being conditioned and manipulated by the government of all kinds of races. But the fact that I even have to say that seems frustrating. But this is what it's building toward. Now, on that same note, by the way, that does not mean that there are not reasons for us to be concerned about all of this. There's obvious racism. There's obvious police brutality. These things exist, as I've been saying for years. But it does not mean that it overshadows everything else all the time, which is happening now. Realize that with him saying this, guys, the reason is because they're building this. Now, Trump's going to play the part, in my opinion. This is my opinion. He's going to play his role. Fighting those Democrats. They're trying to take your liberties while Trump's allowing it to happen, first of all. And on top of that, and again, let's just say president. It could be Obama, Bush. It doesn't matter who we're talking about or what party they're part of. The person in charge, ostensibly, is the person we're talking about. Now, that person could choose to stand up and stop these things from happening. They could choose to stand up and say, no, that's unconstitutional, which means I have the right to stop you. And everybody would support it who believes in the Constitution, which I argue is most people in this country. But he won't do that because that's not what they want, in my opinion. But they're building it, and he's going to play his role back and forth. And he's going to fight against this, and he'll be focusing all of his actions on that, on the Black Lives Matter movement, on the protesters and the rioters and the looters and the agent provocateurs. So it won't be about what you think it's about. We got to get this contact tracing going because these people are ripping the country apart, right? Meanwhile, you get the Democrats saying we need contact tracing to fight the coronavirus, and it's all the same damn thing. And everyone fights the other side and says, oh, you guys are crazy. Put your Trump mask on to fight masks. Oh, everyone's losing their minds as we face the second lockdown. Just like Bill Gates told you, right? Lockdown to pandemic 2. It's on the way, right? It was already on the way when he first said that. States retreat as new virus cases hit all-time high in the United States. Now realize, first of all, something I picked up on a minute ago. Let's be very clear about what they're doing here. I would say not necessarily conflating, but focusing on cases as opposed to deaths. Why? Now, both of them have meaning. But why suddenly did we shift from going deaths to cases? Well, I think it's very clear because if you can continue, when the death rate reveals itself to be as low as it actually is, well, they keep pointing to the cases. It sounds more severe, but we realize, wait a minute, if there's all these cases and 80% of them are asymptomatic and most of them aren't even spreading it, so you only have this small percentage of people that are actually even getting it, and of them, only a small percentage of them are really sick, which ultimately amounts to millions of people because we're a huge country, but it's not that much in the larger sense. Most of them aren't actually that ill. So, but when you say we've got hundreds of thousands of new cases, well, maybe 80% of them aren't actually that sick? That's not actually as dangerous as it sounds. But when they only focus on the cases alone and make that the new marker for where we are, well, sure enough, it continues to look serious. Now, of course, from the partisan perspective, this is going to be a point that one side will jump on, and they should, right? Because this is a manipulation. But understand that I argue that there's not actually people fighting within that two-party illusion. But the point being that they're trying to hype the numbers. And I don't want that to apply to only right or left. We need to see it as an the full agenda for the whole thing. But they are focusing on cases alone now. Now, again, remember too that I said, in my opinion, and I do think the evidence supports this, I think there is something out there. Whatever this is, I think there's something. And we know that they're constantly manipulating and working on these, they're bioengineering all kinds of stuff, which again, we're going to get into about 5 more examples today, which will blow your mind. And I think of all the stuff we've already talked about. I mean, for decades, literally decades, for the 60s, 70s, they've been working, Fort Detrick, they've been working on manipulating biomaterial and making it more dangerous and using it to infect humans. That's actually what they were working on. So now we're at a point where we have something maybe bioengineered with the intention to specifically not be as deadly, but necessarily be more virulent and spread faster. This would be a perfect solution. Just my take on it. But this is what's happening. They are building this up again, and we are seeing a new rise in cases, as they say, and then that's going to lead to we need to lock down again. But actually, if you were saying, okay, well, we're getting 100,000 new cases, right? But the death rate here is only 0.06, and a very small percentage of them are getting dying. Most of them aren't even showing symptoms. Well, that's a little bit of a different perception, wouldn't you say? And most people would say, well, why are we locking down for that? The flu is more severe. Well, guess what? The CDC just added 3 new symptoms. Because it just happens, right? Just all these, excuse me. I'm start laughing. They tell us that, okay, this thing's taking years and decades to change and mutate, but every other day something seems to change, it would appear. But don't try to use their logic here because that just doesn't work. But more symptoms, guess why? Because now anything everywhere, just like I keep telling you. Well, if you don't have symptoms, you still may be sick. You got symptoms that don't apply? Well, they got new ones now, so now it applies. Right? It doesn't matter where you are, what you're feeling, or where you've been, it doesn't matter what your circumstances are. It applies. What they're telling you is no matter how you feel or anything, you may still have it. So guess what? You need to get the vaccine. That's what it's leading to. The new symptoms is just the flu. I mean, it's sniffles and stiffness of, it's right here. It says chills, cough, shortness of breath, fatigue, muscle aches. Oh, you mean the flu? Oh, weird. So now when the flu season comes around, it's just going to be, well, is it COVID? Is it flu? We don't know. Oh, it's just it was just everyone get a vaccine. And they're already telling you to go out there and get the flu vaccine. Again, even though the Pentagon's own study shows very clearly that a flu vaccine makes coronaviruses in general, not just COVID-19, Coronaviruses, 36% more likely. Now, of course, you could argue that maybe COVID-19 is some caveat because they did this study before that was around, or so we're told. Or you could just be logical about it and say it probably makes sense since every other coronavirus in the category applies. But no. Fact check. There's no such study about only COVID-19. And they're right. But they know damn well that that study suggests that this is also coronavirus, meaning that it will make you more sick. And that probably leads right into what they want. But now, when the flu season comes around, well, what do you know? Everybody has everything that applies to this. And as Kelly pointed out, thank you for tagging me, watch what he says here. Watch what understand, guys, this is, and always recognize as well, Health and Human Services, real prominent in all this, which rightly so, as what we understand about it. But recognize again that we're talking about Alex Azar, right? Robert Kadlec, people that are problems. All of these people tied back to some of the most nefarious things you could talk about, and especially Robert Kadlec. The guy who was, along with Jerome Hauer, almost specifically creating the anthrax vaccine that they knew would hurt people and made them take it anyway. And later down the years, the Pentagon lost a lawsuit which proved that they did that. Guess why you don't know about that? Because they never tell you those kind of things. Because it'll reflect today on their situations and their actions. But realize this is Trump's briefing, right? This is a White House coronavirus task force briefing. Meaning, as I said from the very beginning, you could argue if Fauci has a position here based on his standing at, the National Institute of Health, but Trump didn't have to make a task force. He also didn't have to include him. You've seen him pick and choose who gets out there all the time. So all those people that continue to think Fauci is the evil genius behind it all, which, trust me, I believe 100% that he's part of this. But if you believe that omits Trump from responsibility, it just doesn't make sense. They're all part of it. Redfield, Dr. Birx, all of them. So here they are coming up and saying, we are supporting the actions. You should be quarantining. You should be wearing masks. You should be social distancing. Right? They go all of it. Okay? But they're not saying you have to, right? They're leaving that to the state, so it does not appear to reflect, but the point is they're still saying it. So for all those people that are supportive of the Trump administration as if they're counter to that idea, how do you explain that? Oh, well, it's just politics and Trump does it because it's politically. That is the cop-out of suggesting that Trump is taking actions that he doesn't agree with that hurt you because if he did otherwise, they would hurt him politically, is to suggest that he's choosing politics over you. And that's good. That's a good explanation somehow, but this is what I'm hearing from people, right? Whenever there's a cross where somehow it seems Trump is doing something that doesn't align with what they think he should be doing, well, it's because the Democrats would attack him if he did it otherwise, and he has to do it for politics. Again, you're telling me politics mean more than you, which I agree with, actually, but they wouldn't say that. Watch what he's saying here.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I wanted to add some comments. Once again, I want to stress and thank all Americans to embrace the importance of social distancing recommendations to slow the spread of COVID. As I've said before, we're not defenseless. These are, in fact, very powerful weapons.
Weapons. Very powerful weapons. Everyone is using this analogy as if we're in a war, right? That's not an accident. And you'll see even more so when we get to the article from Whitney and Raul about exactly why this all adds up. We're in a war, according to them. And your ability to social distance and the contact tracing, these are weapons. Let's not pretend like that doesn't have meaning.
And it's our collective responsibility to recommit ourselves to put them into routine practice. Again, to stay 6 feet apart from each other as much as possible.
I don't know. I also have to just point out, I find it odd that what is it? Is it just me, or does he not have some kind of weird grin this whole time? Well, I mean, maybe I'm just crazy and that's just my perception, but the way he's almost like he's trying not to smile the whole time he's talking.
Wear face coverings when we're in public, and to practice vigorous hand hygiene. And to commit to do so, as we've heard today, to do our part to protect the vulnerable. I also want to appeal to the millennials and those that are under 40. It's really important that this group really commit themselves to these practices to protect those at risk. And it's not just the elderly that...
Right. So you get what he's saying again, guys. Again, from Trump's own task force. They are saying, not just when you're saying anybody, healthy or sick. That does not make sense. Never before have we quarantined the healthy. This is what's happening. It does not make sense. There is no precedent. It's not right. But here we are. Both sides. One side may be telling you in their state what's mandated, what's also happening in Republican states, but we're not talking about that. Here we are.
That are at risk. Many of us may have friends and colleagues that are younger that may not advertise their underlying comorbidities, as the case would be with, say, type 1 diabetes or an underlying immune deficiency. So again, asking this team of millennials and younger people in this country to come and commit themselves. I agree with Ambassador Birx. We're very thankful that the group is now coming forward to get tested, but I also want this group to put into vigilant practice the importance of our social distancing. The one thing that I wanted to stress, though, is that there are differences in what we're experiencing today than what we all experienced in March and April and May. And one of the things I want us to focus on is not the cases per se, but the consequences, the impact of those cases. It wasn't long ago, probably within 2 months ago, it's hard to believe, I don't think many people realize, that 27% of all deaths that occurred in the United States actually died of a pneumonia. That was a pneumonia, could have been influenza, could have been COVID. 27%, 1 in 4 of all the deaths in the United States just 2 months ago was caused by pneumonia. I'm happy to say today the deaths to pneumonia in this nation is back to baseline.
Gee, I wonder if that has anything to do with the ventilators, right? The 90+% rate of death when they're forced a ventilator down your throat for something they didn't understand. Or on and on and on, right? I mean, this whole thing would frustrate you. As always, I stopped doing these a long time ago and choosing to, sit here and watch these all out because it'll take 5 hours to go over all of the things they say that are incorrect and misrepresenting. The bottom line is, guys, just recognize that this is the representation of the Trump administration. This is the task force. Okay? Whether or not you pretend that if you think that these people are the enemy, why then does Trump continue to let them represent the Trump administration on the task force? How does that make sense? Right? Of course, you can argue that it's some kind of 4D chess move and there's a secret, and you know what? You may be right, but that's a guess. There's nothing that supports that. The bottom line is these people are still driving our policy. They're still telling you to do the very things that you collectively pretend he doesn't believe you should do. As Trump, I mean. Right? Think about that. Here's Texas, by the way, also from Kelly. Thank you. Closing time for Texas bars start at noon today. That was on the 25th, 6th, today. Due to increasing coronavirus cases, right? Cases, understand, again, guys. So not deaths, but cases. So we have an increase in cases, even as we know the data shows that most of those cases aren't even at risk, but they don't care about that. So why aren't people saying this? Why aren't people in positions of power in the federal government saying, Texas, California, you guys are doing this and it's wrong? Because we know the numbers aren't wrong. Like, think about how crazy it is to suggest that Trump knows that this is fake, or he knows it's not real, or knows that this is an illusion, or knows that Fauci's lying, but yet then still allows states to hurt the people in those states. Are they not also Americans? Is he not the president of the country? Like, just realize that all of these inconsistencies in this logic, that there's some kind of battle here. All of them are doing this to you. All of them. Whether you're in Republican Texas or in Democrats California, it's happening. They're closing it down. Here's the actual executive order. Governor Abbott takes executive action to contain spread of COVID-19. Governor Greg Abbott today issued an executive order limiting certain businesses and services as part of the state's efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19. The decision comes as the number of people tested positive for COVID-19 and the number of hospitalizations have increased. Right? Now, again, even taking a moment from Trump's logic in regard to testing, because he's not wrong in what he said. He's wrong in pretending we shouldn't keep testing because of it. But to suggest that, the more testing we do, the more cases we'll find. And that's totally correct. right? So realize that as we do more mass testing, which again, I argue it's ridiculous to pretend that that shouldn't have been happening right when this started, because if it did, we would have had, the reason, just as I said when this started, you want to know why I think they weren't testing when they had the opportunity to right in the beginning? Because they would have immediately found out that it was all across the country like it is now, way before it should have been. See how that works? Because I believe it was here long before we were told. But that's neither here nor there in this case, because either way, now we're at a point where they're saying, well, we're going to stop because we don't want to see, but some places are still testing, and we will continue to see more cases. But that contrasts with the actual data of how dangerous it is. But yet they're still closing you down. They're removing your rights. They're still killing your business. They're stopping everything. It's all about control. Now, on top of all of that, without giving up too much information, I have somebody, or let's put it this way. I have access potentially to somebody who is right now a contact tracer. So potentially we could end up with some more inside information. I'm going to leave it at that. The bottom line is, it's very alarming what I'm already finding out. First of all, UCLA establishes their COVID-19 pandemic response training program. This is what we're talking about. It's happening as we speak, guys. You want to hear some really disconcerting facts? It took 3 days to train the person. Of those 3 days in this extensive training that can end someone's life, I mean that, but I meant more so, destroy someone's life. Of those 3 days of mass intensive training, 2 of them were online. So 1 day of actual training, of actual real, this is just a random person. Anybody could have applied. 3 days, and you can go out there and be like, oh, guess what? I'm going to have you arrested because I think you're sick, or because you're a party that I disagree with, or because you expressed views that I think are dangerous, or because you're not wearing a mask. It doesn't matter. These are people, just like you and I. 3 days, 2 of them online. As I understand it, and I think this has been public knowledge, 5% of general government employees right now are going to be tapped for this contact tracing program. So 5%. About like over 200,000 apparently of employees. 5% of those, 10,000 or so, are going to be contact tracers. What would be interesting to consider is, which people are they going to use? Ask yourself, would they use the best and the brightest? Or are they going to use the most pliable, low-level, the people that do the mediocre work? Let's make them contact tracers so we can tell them what to do. Right? I mean, just let's pretend they're not going to be like, hey, let's take our top 5% of our government employees and go give them 3 days of training for this menial job. No, that's not what I think. But the rest are all civilians. The rest. 3 days of training, 2 online. And guess what? As I understand it, they even get their own little area to police. Doesn't that sound lovely? 3 days of training, and they're going to be out there on the beat watching for you. Watching for whether or not you're wearing a mask. And as I understand it, they're already done. Right now, they're just waiting for orders. Guess what? And now that the lockdown's back, perfect timing. It's almost like they planned it, right? It's almost like they prepared for it, and now we're here. Gee, seems crazy, right? Well, guess what? Dr. Fauci just said today on this live briefing, it's your fault. Right? He played it a little backhandedly and said, well, it's your fault, but it's not your fault, right? He's exactly what we said would happen. It's your fault because you protested. It's your fault because you went to the rally. It's your fault across the board. And guess what? It becomes bipartisan. Well, you protested for George Floyd. Now you're all sick. Well, guess what? You went to that rally with Trump. Now you're all sick. I mean, it's exactly what we told you. And guess what? It's your fault because you didn't listen. Whether or not it even is true or not, who cares? Because it adds up. You're going to have that screaming, bleeding, maniacal 1%, or however, whatever percentage it is, of the people that mindlessly follow Fox News and CNN and whatever else, screaming about how we all did this to ourselves, and that they're going to project that as the majority, guys. That's what always happens. As he says in the chat, it is a business. COVID-19 is the business of the future. Right? We are a virus. It's almost like they're trying to shift away from war to a viral virus-focused thing, which I argue they'll never shift fully away from war. But at the end of the day, this is like I said the other day, they are re-engineering our entire reality, our economy around what we're seeing. That's why we're seeing COVID-19 stores pop up, which is it's farcical. It's ridiculous. But which leads us to one of the main points of going around today. Okay? This is something that we need to really understand. This discussion about the masks is getting irrational. Let's be very clear about this. If you want to wear a mask, go wear a mask. No one is telling you not to wear a mask if you think it works, if you think it's necessary, if you think it makes you feel better, go wear one. Just don't tell me or anybody else that they have to, right? But see, the problem is when we say, like, well, no one's telling anybody that they have to do it. Oh, that's just because it's safe and it's, okay, fine. Then what's the problem? See, the problem is that you don't like that we're not wearing masks. So it is about making us wear the masks. Otherwise, there would be no problem, right? Think about how disjointed that is. Every time we come to this point, it's like, no one's telling anybody they have to. It's only about because people are safe and because of on and on and on. So if that was the only case, then go wear your masks. Doesn't end there, does it? It ends with us being forced to wear them, as is happening in Texas, or excuse me, in Miami, in California, right this moment. They're being forced to wear them anywhere outside their home, and that's easy to look up. So it is. So in that case, my point is that if your government's telling you you're being forced to do it, you could be at your job 8 hours a day. You could be outside doing all kinds of things. Imagine if you're doing manual labor outside. Think about how dangerous that is. The point is that you shouldn't have to. That's it. And here's why, guys. Because at the end of the day, according to the United States Department of Labor, and this is directly from OSHA and CDC, cloth face coverings, okay? Exactly what they keep telling everybody to wear because, we didn't have enough masks or whatever happened when we first started. There's a lot it says in there, but the one I want you to focus on will not protect the wearer against airborne transmissible infectious agents due to loose fit and lack of seal or inadequate filtration. Okay, period. Face cloth coverings do not help you fight off what we're dealing with. Period. Will not protect you from viruses. That's what that says. Okay, so that's off the table. Okay, Ryan, what about the surgical masks? Doctors wear them. They have to be, right? Okay, but they don't wear them for that purpose. That's the misunderstanding, because guess what? Surgical masks will not protect the wearer against airborne transmissible infectious agents due to the exact same reasons. The only thing that will is a respirator, right? A tight-fitting, complete sealed respirator. Now, if you want to go around arguing that we all have to wear something like that for the rest of our lives, well, that's exactly the point, and nobody wants to do that. Well, right now, what they're trying to tell you to do, and even this is a problem, understand? Well, I guess I would argue that respirators are better in a lot of ways because you're getting airflow from outside. Here's the point. Both surgical masks and face coverings, which are right now being mandated, which I'm going to get to next in multiple locations, are damaging to you. As I've shown numerous times. As I just showed with a previous video of a person testing it using OSHA oxygen quality monitor, and that it's dangerous to wear for extended periods of time. Let's be real clear. It's dangerous to wear at all because what it does is it stops your oxygen flow. It creates a dangerous environment of CO2. And it also, in fact, traps in parts of viral matter that you then breathe in and out. And it creates a small flight or fight response and on and on and on. Guys, these are easy things to look up. That doesn't mean you shouldn't wear it if you think it makes you safe. That's the point. The point is that as a informed consent and all, as an individual, a free living being, we should have the choice to say, no, I don't want to do that because I believe it makes me sick. And on top of that, I don't believe I need to for a litany of reasons. But as we're staring at this, literally telling you that they do not stop the virus, that needs to put an end to the conversation. So what are they for then? But you could argue it's for, spittle flying off of your mouth that may infect somebody else. Okay. So if you're going to be around people at risk, then maybe you should wear a mask. Other than that, if you're going to go to your job, walk down the street, go jogging, which I literally heard. So we were just talking about somebody who was jogging in 90-degree heat with a mask on. Do you realize how unhealthy that is? I mean, this is just, it's so crazy that we're here. But people will still say I'm crazy. People will still say this guy's out of his mind because, blah, he got this right. This is directly from your government. So if they don't stop the virus, what are they for? Here is an individual pointing out that there's $250 fines for people not wearing masks in Miami. Miami Mayor says that he will ask the city commission to pass emergency ordinance tomorrow. All right? Ryan, that's only a tweet. That's probably not even real. Oh, well, here it is. Miami commissioners pass emergency order to fine people not wearing masks in public. It's right now, guys. For all those people, even in my chat, that keep saying, Ryan, you're being exaggerating this story, or that I'm going to stop watching you because of this coverage. Fine, go on somewhere else. I'm going to continue to cover the truth, whether it makes you uncomfortable or not. It's happening. People keep saying that that's just extreme. They're not making anybody. Yeah, they are. Everywhere when you're outside of your home. Everywhere. Here's California. New shutdown coming for Imperial County. Gavin Newsom says stay-at-home order must resume. And he's also someone who's saying this. In California, right now, the mandate is wearing masks. So as we know that they're not stopping the virus, I again ask you, what are they for? Especially for those who are healthy. Right? That's the real point. So if you are not sick, let's even say you went out and got tested and you're certain that you're not sick. Why would you wear a mask? Because it doesn't stop the virus, so you're not protecting you. You're not sick, so you're not going to put anybody else at risk. So what the heck are we talking about? Right? I mean, understand that even when this began, the World Health Organization itself came out and said, yeah, if you're healthy, you don't need to wear a mask. And that was countered by the CDC, and then weirdly that just went away. And now we're all on the same page, right? Because the World Health Organization works with China, but yet they work... They're all on the same team, guys. It's all against you. That's what it's about. But here we are, shutting this down. And here's another video, by the way. Now, by the way, this is, I guess, some Republican member of the government. I don't support this person or even really understand his views. It really makes no difference. Just like it didn't make a difference about the other guy, the video I showed you, where he was testing next to his mouth. It doesn't matter. Look at it this way. If you went up to a random person on the street and said, hey, man, are masks safe to wear? And they gave you some explanation. Well, then that would matter if they were a doctor or not, right? To some degree. If it was just some guy on the street, we'd be like, why do we care what he has to say? The doctor, okay, well, a doctor might know more. But when you're doing a test like this that can be reproduced and the data about it can be researched and looked up right now, who cares what the person is or what they're about or what they've done? It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference. Because the test is what's important. So if you want to say, oh, this guy's a Republican and he's crazy, fine, who cares? Are you challenging the results of the test? Are you saying that he cheated? Are you saying he lied? If all you're going to say is he's this and he's that, go somewhere else, because that's irrelevant, and that's what a child would say. That's ad hominem, and that's destroying this country. The test is easy. I reproduced it myself. As I said, I want people to go out there and do it. And here's another example of another person doing it, and he's a member of the government. Same thing. You don't necessarily have to show it to you all again, just so you guys can see. He does the same test. He's got his monitor. He even gives you the type it is, so you can order it online. Now I don't know whether or not that's OSHA approved or not, but at the end of the day, it still shows you the test, right? Does the same thing with the mask. Now I argue that the other version of the test was a lot more accurate because of the style and the wand that you used for the testing. But nonetheless, guys, the point is this is being reproduced all across the internet. And with a whole bunch of different styles and different outlets, standing in a field, standing in a room, it doesn't matter. The facts are very clear that your breathing is suppressed and the CO2 circulates within and the air quality goes dramatically down when you're wearing a mask. And that's why even doctors will remove them in certain cases when it's not necessary. But to not belabor the point, guys, because people that probably don't want to believe this won't believe it anyway. No, don't believe it. That's what's so crazy. Someone said to me on the last video, look at these guys just finding some debunking video on YouTube. They're crazy. Think about the irrational mind state it takes to say something like that. Right? Did you look at the video? Did you even consider what they were saying? Right? We're not looking out for some debunking video. We're looking for the facts. To argue that masks work and not actually prove it is not anything to debunk. This is just the reality of the situation. And on top of that, no one's telling you don't have to wear one. The problem is that you think we should have to wear them, even though you won't want to say that. And here is what I keep trying to show people. This is not some temporary thing, guys. For all these people out there that are screaming about how we have to go along, they're already planning for your future. There's designers, and that's why you have COVID-19 shops opening up. They're redesigning our entire society around this new normal. They decided that before this started. Ooh, look at these trendy new face masks, right? Building a world where that's the norm. Always, right? Not just here and there, but where you wear all the time. Wearing PPE is humanity's new norm. Well, no, thank you. Now recognize as well, that's not just Dr. Redfield and Fauci and all the rest. Here's Pence himself, urging Americans to do their part to stop the coronavirus. Pence made his little round going from state to state doing this. And he says, though the word mask was, interestingly not discussed, which I think that's very intentional because they know the word mask is a buzzword now. So they say personal protective equipment and they pretend that means he's not saying wear masks, right? Like if this is how they play this game, all the supporters will say, no, he's saying PPE and that's some kind of QAnon sidestep. It's irrational. Right? But it's no more sane than the Russiagate nonsense. Like both sides are lost in this manipulation. He's saying protective equipment because he's telling you to wear a mask. And they don't want to say the word mask because mask is taboo today, at least within these groups. But he avoided that in favor of the PPE. And it says Pence and Dr. Birx explained how the increase in new cases and hospitalization is alarming, and we will require Americans to continue to cooperate with federal and local restrictions. Let me say that again. He said that we will require Americans to continue to cooperate with federal and local restrictions. So Pence, Donald Trump's VP, is straight up telling you wherever state you're in that you're required to follow what that state is telling you. Okay, so for all the people that are being forced to wear masks in Miami right now, that scream about how Trump wouldn't do, well, Mike Pence just told you to do it. Let's get past this illusion that they're somehow not, they are all on the same page. They're just playing different levels of the illusion. They're going to travel all around the world doing the same thing. But just for full disclosure, understand that I think Biden's stance is a hell of a lot more alarming, just so we can be very clear about that, because that's the thing usually when you only show one and, oh, well, you didn't show the other side, which you shouldn't have to, because I'm not talking about that. But the point is, nonetheless, Biden says he would force Americans to wear face masks in public. Again, think about how that challenges the narrative. They're not telling you you don't have to do it. It's for your safety. Here he is saying you're going to have to if he gets elected. So let's just put that to bed. Face masks, mandatory. He would force you in public, meaning anywhere outside your home. Even though I can literally show this page to someone and they'll still quibble about it and be like, oh, no, it's everywhere. People just don't want to believe it. It's the same thing on one side. People that believe in Biden will equivocate and be like, well, no, he means only when it's at risk and put words in his mouth. And the same thing with Trump. No, he didn't mean it like that. What he means is, it's all leading the same direction, guys. And it's just time to see it. It's time to realize what we're talking about here. The alarming situation in which we find ourselves and the new normal, the lockdown circling around you once again. And it's only going to take some extreme event to, just kind of quietly lean in from Trump to make it all happen again. That's what I'm expecting to happen. There's going to be some kind of action, or at the very least, a lack of resistance from Donald Trump, from his administration. And it's going to happen once again. Right? And it's going to, imagine if it's something that much more severe, if something else gets put into the mix. All it's going to take is some new psyop to scare people just enough. And look, if Trump stood up today and said, I have new information, I saw something that I think is very serious, and I'm mandating that you all have to stay in your homes and wear masks because it's very serious. I argue that all of his supporters would say, oh, well, I believe him now. Now we have to wear masks because Trump said so. And that is the problem with the two parties. That's the problem with politics. It's mind warping. But the point on top of all of it is that there is censorship going on around all this stuff, including the stuff we're talking about here today. And I think we already got a little bit hit there early on the show. But this is a really interesting part of the censorship that I'm seeing. From RT, Twitter, are you okay? Platform slaps COVID-19 conspiracy warning on posts containing words. You'll love it. Oxygen and frequency. What does that bring to mind? Right? What do those two words bring to your mind? There's a few topics that you might want to talk about. Well, obviously, in regard to COVID-19, which is what they're tagging it with, we understand the idea of the lack of oxygen, the hypoxia that's been happening very frequently. And that's, the ventilators jam down their throats and then it basically kills them. And, and the numbers get high. The bottom line is they're censoring it no matter what you say. Look at this guy's picture. All he put was, he just simply put out frequency oxygen. And it says, get the facts. I mean, I just told you this the other day. When you go search anything on Google, anything, and it will come with even the most ridiculous side-connected thing. Like I said, just type in virus, and you'll get bombed with COVID-19 content. Like if you just go in and type in, think of something just totally abstract. What was the first virus? Something like that, like a genuine question, like you're doing a report. You're in fifth grade, and you're like, what was the first virus? You won't get the information anymore because Google doesn't care about you actually having your questions answered. It just jams in your face whatever they want you to be seeing around that moment. Google's broken. Like it literally doesn't work anymore. You cannot search for things like you used to be able to search for specific questions and you would get just a whole page of those questions on answers on Quora, on, Ask Jeeves or whatever else used to be around. And by the way, I did this test today. I did this on Yandex or some other thing and I got all kinds of answers, specific questions to what I was asking. I did it on Google. I got COVID-19 updates, COVID-19. It's crazy. If we ever had any doubts that they're controlling your flow of information, you shouldn't be doubting it anymore. But this one also ties in thoughts of, 5G, which I'm not afraid to say. Right, people, this is what's funny. People out there act like saying 5G gets you censored, and so it gives them more clicks when they play these word games and they pretend like they're not, just saying 5G, it's not going to get you censored. But if I were to say another variation, which I'm probably going to get into here, I'm never going to self-censor. They might, it's possible. I probably guarantee you they will suppress it. But again, I'm not going to self-censor regardless. I'm not going to play these silly word games and let them win. No, we're going to talk about 5G. We're going to talk about why it seems interesting that the two words oxygen and frequency are being censored in very weird and overt ways. Now, one of the tweets they point out here is from Tim Pool, which is interesting because this is the one that I found the most relevant because look at all the people beneath it. Tim says, this is a funny new meme. Post anything random about oxygen frequency and Twitter slaps a weird editorial note on your post. For example, this is literally what he says. I was scuba diving and the frequency of my breathing cost me too much oxygen and I had to resurface early. Boom, they hit it with a COVID-19, right? Is that not the most absurd thing you've ever seen? But keep going down, right? There's all these examples of the most silly things. What if I spell it wrong? Oxygen frequency doesn't pop up. What do you know, right? Oxygen frequency correct, pops right up. Just the two words. That's it. All of them. All of them. Why would that be, guys? Why would that be? Now, first of all, I think we can understand that there's a huge issue around the idea of oxygen and how they've handled the ventilator situation. So that's one idea. But the real thing that stands out to me is that I really do believe that there's a huge agenda about 5G happening simultaneously right now. Now, I went over all the information in regard to how it might pertain to COVID-19 multiple shows ago and numerous times. I haven't dismissed that entirely, but I have put it aside for the moment only because I do not think that is, at the moment, what I think is the most relevant in regard to what is actually happening. And I could be wrong. But there was definitely some interesting stuff to that. Like, definitely. And just so you guys understand, remember that I did the video about how 5G, the executive order that Trump signed was being rolled out quietly underneath all of this, and they censored the video because they said it was fake news, even though it was real and it was totally happening. Remember that? Yep. So there's another bill on top of that they did. We just talked about it. So yeah, the reality is they're 100% doing a 5G push while this is all happening. Now you could argue that it's just a coincidence. It's just a coincidence that while the country's completely closed down, that they're forcing in this technology that nobody wants. Or it could be that that's part of the point. Or that they just are opportunist and using it. Either way, my video was 100% correct. And yeah, it's still censored on YouTube. Does that not ring alarm bells? First Net Authority Board approves network instruments for 5G. Right? It's happening right now. First Responder Network Authority Board today approved the first set of investments for enhancing FirstNet, a nationwide public safety broadband network. Specifically, the board approved more than $200 million for the initial network upgrades to set FirstNet on the path to 5G. So it's not like it's just, the point is, it's just happening. They're not even necessarily keeping it quiet. In regard to installation, they're actively keeping it quiet. I've proven to you in 2 different cases that they have been installed and that people basically lied about what they were doing. And the people later went back and checked. And sure enough, it was a 5G company with materials that were installed. I proved it on this show. And yet when they were confronted, they lied and said that's not what they were doing. Why would that be? Right? I mean, they can censor it all they want. It's happening. It's real. And we all see it. When I'm talking about the installation, right? That's not even a secret. Like, they're openly talking about how they're going to rapidly put this in. The new bill was talking about rapid implementation. And I talk about how they're doing that under the cover of COVID-19. Oh, conspiracy theory. It's just ridiculous. The clown world we find ourselves in. But sure enough, guys, it is 100% happening on a pretty massive scale. So I come back to the question. Why? Why? Right? What's the point of that? Well, for those that may not remember, there was something to that. There was something to the idea of the oxygen depletion in the air in regard to 5G, which I just find interesting and relevant, right? The idea that right when you get to this exact technology is right when you get this 98% of energy absorption by O2 at 60 gigahertz. Right? Between 5 and 6, pretty much. That's what we're staring at. So just keep that in mind as this goes forward. Now, whether you think this is about COVID-19, which is what they're making it about, or whatever else, I still just find it a little bit interesting. Now, whatever you think about any of this, just the takeaway at the end of the day should simply be how obviously they're controlling the flow of information. Censorship and all that, that's just right on its face now. Why? Well, guess what? COVID-19. So yet another thing that's been normalized because of the new normal. Right? They're just removing content and censoring things and deleting videos. And they used to act like they had to explain themselves before. No, they just don't care. They don't care. Welcome to the new normal, right? Just like everything else. Now let's change directions here for a minute and talk about the idea of, it's not just Bill Gates, but Bill Gates is an obvious linchpin to all of this stuff we're talking about. But let's talk about the weird eugenics-tied technologies and innovations, if you want to call it that are being forced on us right now that tie back to Bill Gates, but are really alarming in the sense that they're seemingly building something that attacks life, right? That in every sense is essentially kind of chipping away at reality, at anything, as you'll see in a moment, as James Evan Blotto puts it, constantly stealing what's real and replacing it with something that's not. And, evolution, innovation, it's better for you. That's what we're seeing today. And this article, to start with that, is something I hope you guys will pay attention to. I don't mind this little side deal here I have. I did this so I could keep track of the parts I wanted to read with yellow. It's a nifty little thing I just got. But eco-genocide and the genetically engineered mosquito army. Great article, as always, that I hope you'll read in full by Whitney Webb and Raul Diego. Fantastic work. To read the opening, the enemies of life are breeding their own agents of ecological destruction, aided and abetted by the incompetent EPA and a rubber-stamped government in Florida, which just gave unanimous approval for the release of hundreds of millions of genetically modified mosquitoes by a company with deep ties to Bill Gates, the U.S. military, and of course, Big Ag. Now, this ties into COVID-19 as well. Now, there's something interesting I came across today, which I'm not going to talk about, but that there may be some interesting tie-in here in regard to mosquitoes and different variants of mosquitoes in regard to what we're dealing with today with COVID-19. Just somebody's theory that I was looking at today, which I found very interesting, and then suddenly we see this GM mosquito thing. So that may be coming up in the future, but I want to read some parts of this article and to see how this overarching idea that's not whether COVID-19 was just the excuse, the catalyst they're using, there's this long planned agenda. This eugenics, I don't know if eugenical is a word. It sounds like it's correct. Eugenical agenda to deplete, control, diminish the population for their own purposes and in so many more nefarious ways. And just simply using us as experiments to be tested on, sort of like what they're doing with the vaccines today. But it says, despite the EPA's criminal negligence in failing to follow mandated procedures, it was ultimately left to authorities in Florida to give their consent for this plan. Now understand, the EPA, Trump's EPA at the moment, green-lighted this despite all of the concerns of people. despite all of the actual information that shows that there's dangers here, but didn't matter, right? As they said, failed to follow mandated procedures. Does that not sound familiar? Right, again, even think of like a microcosm idea as it pertains to Donald Trump, right? The EPA could stand there and be like, oh, sorry, our hands are tied. Or, in the reverse scenario, whatever. The point is that they're choosing to ignore something that they're mandated not to do. So that happens all the damn time, is the point. So back to the point about Trump, is that he pretends that he doesn't have the ability to stop these governments from law, or the governors from. It's ridiculous. Even if you think he doesn't actually have that ability, the moment they do something unconstitutional, it's not legitimate after that. So he could step in and do what he could stop them from doing it. Let's put it that way. And then I'm not even arguing that's what I want. I'm just saying that it shows you that he doesn't want it to stop. Now it says, ultimately left to authorities in Florida to give their consent for this plan, which they gave in spades despite overwhelming opposition. A public forum held on this issue returned an incontrovertible verdict of 31,174 comments opposing the release and only 56 supporting it. Kind of reminds me of the bill in California in regard to vaccinations, in regard to removing religious and different reasons to not get them. Same thing. Thousands of people showed up to stand against it. Only a few to support it. And guess what? It passed anyway. They don't care what you think. These people are literally supposed to be doing what you want. Like that is their job, their constituents. They're supposed to represent, they're not supposed to do what they think or what they believe in. They're supposed to simply be the embodiment of their constituents. That's the illusion we tell ourselves. 31,000 people said, no, we don't want it. 56 said, yay, and did it anyway. Didn't sway them, it says. Didn't sway a single state agency when it came to allow the deliberate invasion of a new man-made mosquito into what is already one of the nation's most imperiled ecosystems. Now, it says in 2015, Oxitec, which is the group we're talking about, in a press release then, they claimed that their trials in Brazil, Panama, Grand Caymans, and Malaysia had resulted in a 90% reduction of the Aedes aegypti pest population, which is a certain kind of mosquito. The same claim was made in a 2016 U.S. congressional hearing of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. But in fact, efficacy trials in Malaysia were abandoned and major problems were reported over how Oxitec interprets its data. What do you know? Okay, so it's really not about... Oh, okay, good. I thought I lost that bottom one. So it's really not about... Or at the very least, you should be willing to consider that they're saying a 90% reduction, by the way, which is something that Bill Gates and plenty of people have pointed to in numerous examples for why this works. But these people who are actually there, people in Malaysia, are going, well, that's not what's happening, right? So you're just interpreting your data how you want. In addition, it says no direct evidence has ever been produced to prove that the Oxitec genetically engineered mosquitoes caused a fall in the population of disease-carrying mosquitoes in any of the countries. So all they had to do is just say, we did it. And of course, because they're supported by people in the government and supported by people like Bill Gates, well then okay, good, success. No need to prove anything because we already want this to be the case. So just give us something we can pretend is good and we'll roll forward. In the Cayman Islands, female mosquito populations went up rather than down, a fact discovered only after Oxitec's results were obtained through FOIA. Doesn't that show you what the reality is? Not until they were forced to admit that they failed, that what they did the same thing they're claiming, reduced it by 90%, but in the Cayman Islands, it actually went up. Only once they were forced to admit it. Sounds legitimate to me. The same year of Oxitec's first application for release in the U.S., the company carried out its first large-scale trials in Brazil and reported an 81% suppression of the wild Aedes aegypti in the second year of the trial. But the same problems and fudged data that plagued the Grand Caymans reports were also identified and discredited many of the company's claims and success. So not only did they get caught with FOIA requests on one, they were later proved to be lying in another one. They fudged the data. And it discredited many of the other claims. This is the same group right now who is doing this in Florida with Bill Gates' blessing, with the government's blessing. But yet they were not only shown to be lying one time, caught another time, and here they are. It sounds just like Robert Cadleck and the anthrax vaccine. The very person who knowingly used a vaccine that was going to hurt people, that he knew would hurt people, to make money and control, is now the one in charge of the entire strategic national stockpile for the HSS. That's Robert Cadleck. They're in charge of driving the direction of which vaccine gets chosen. How does that make sense? This government promotes and supports the people that lie for it. That's how it makes sense. It says Oxytec's claims for its earlier trials in Panama made claims similar to all others, but also failed to convince experts. Now, fast forward 5 years, and Zika makes its first appearance. What do you know? Remember Zika? Remember that thing? I just saw a clip from today when Fauci was talking about Zika, and he goes, yeah, we had Zika and we were going to do the vaccine, and it just suddenly disappeared. What do you know? Yeah, weird, right? All that, remember all the talk, Zika is going to destroy the world. It's funny. They were trying it then too, and it wasn't working, I guess. But it made its first appearance, a new mosquito-borne disease that spreads rapidly in Miami-Dade County, in particular, and coincided with Oxytec's first federal level application. What do you know? Don't you love those coincidences? So right when Oxytec first produces its federal level application for using this exact thing, just so happens they have a reason to use it. What do you know? Now, opposition, however, remained strong, and Oxytec would have to wait for an administration that was willing to overlook troublesome scientific concerns, right? Such as the current administration, and regulations to give them a chance, right? There's never been an administration more primed to overlook troublesome scientific concerns and regulations than right now. Trump and his Koch-led EPA transition team provided just the right atmosphere for the UK biotech to finally achieve its horrific dreams. Lovely. Don't forget, and it's important to realize the Koch-led EPA transition team, right? It's just as alarming as the Goldman Sachs Obama team or the current I don't know why I'm blanking on the current group that's infested Trump's, other than the Israeli government. Right? There's other bank versions. Anyway, they're all infested. It's the same idea, is my point. Now, Oxytec's origins and the man in the trenches. This is the main guy right here. It says Oxytec was first founded in 2002 in the United Kingdom as Oxford Insect Technologies, a vehicle for commercializing technology that had been developed by Oxford University scientists. It remained relatively obscure until it was acquired for $160 million by the US-based biotechnology firm Precigen. Right? So Oxford had it when it was bought out by the US government, or rather the US-based firm that I argue and later proved to have direct ties to the government. In 2015, a firm that applies, guess what, engineering and biology systems to enable DNA-based control over the function of output of living cells. Doesn't that sound lovely? That's what we're talking about. That's the company right now. Oxytec was founded by this company who, quote, applies engineering to biological systems to enable DNA-based control over the function of output of living cells. Makes you all warm and fuzzy. Notably, Precigen, the same group we're talking about, has since turned its focus entirely to human gene editing. Hey, big surprise. So again, the group that's involved right now with the mosquitoes that are being let out, right, under the guise this is supposed to be fighting off these viral spreads and diseases, the idea is this same group is also involved with human gene editing. Isn't that just a coincidence? The exact same thing that they're talking about with vaccines and the RNA vaccines and the DNA vaccines and, what everybody else is working on, Charles Lieber, Bill Gates, everybody. What a coincidence. It's all part of the same group, it seems like, using a patented approach called Better DNA, while Oxytec was sold to Third Security, a venture capital firm headed by Precigen's former executive chairman earlier this year. Now, shortly after its acquisition by Precigen, Gray Franson, this gentleman here, or Gray Franson, became Oxytec's CEO, an alumni of the U.S. State Department, who worked closely in connecting non-governmental organizations, the regime change engines like USAID and NED, those guys, the ones that are overthrowing countries for the CIA. Yeah, history's all there. So he worked for the State Department closely with those groups and the military, and well as developing the State Department's post-conflict response policy in a variety of conflict zones. So as much as this guy may look a little bit kind, This is the guy that was working with the State Department to, destroy Libya, destroy Syria, destroy Iraq, well, I don't know how far back it goes, but the point is that this is the guy that's the policy. Post-conflict response. Yeah, that worked. They are batting zero. So this guy is not doing a good job, or rather, he's doing a perfect job, and you just don't understand what they're trying to do. It also says he began his career at during the NATO invasion of the Balkans. Now it says he joined the State Department a year after founding another group this title cracks me up. He joins the State Department as the Special Assistant to the Assistant Secretary and Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Political Military Affairs. That's his full title, or was anyway. At the State Department, he first focused on the development of post-conflict response policy. Now it says Franson's jump to the life sciences, which is what happened after that, the life sciences industry, what Bill Gates seems focused on, would also result from his ties to the public sector as he was appointed president of a company called Olfactor Laboratories that develops novel technologies and systems for combating mosquitoes that transmit disease, based on research financed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the U.S. government National Institutes of Health. Same old, right? As president of Olfactor, Fredson signed agreements with the U.S. military, Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, to employ the company's technology at U.S. military bases around the world. The WRAR is a subordinate of the U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command, which, guess what, oversees U.S. controversial biodefense lab Fort Detrick, Maryland, that once conducted a series of covert biowarfare tests on U.S. civilians that sought to examine the feasibility of mosquitoes as vectors for bioweapons. 100% accurate. Yellow fever mosquitoes, Lyme disease ticks. It's all history, guys. Your government, by the way, still doing it right this moment. The connections can't be ignored. Upon leaving Olfactor, he immediately became an advisor to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention to, quote, combat Zika and dengue in Puerto Rico, and subsequently replaced Hayden Perry as the CEO of Oxitec. Soon after joining Oxitec, he began courting high-powered investors for the company's gene drive or genetic extinction technologies. Genetic extinction. The very thing that are being weaponized against other countries using insect vectors. Ultimately, again, securing support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Gene extinction technology. Always the same tieback, right? Ending life, removing life, destroying life, suppressing life. That year, the Gates Foundation provided Oxitec with $4.1 million in grants. Now, in addition to expanding the company's product portfolio, Franson had also taken charge of charities, quote unquote, that served to lobby governments in Africa to adopt the very technologies developed and patented by Oxitec. So testing on Africa, just like is happening today with the current COVID vaccine. Franson serves as chairman of the board of Pilgrim Africa, a Seattle-based NGO partnered with the former lead investigator of Olfactor Laboratories and backed by the Gates Foundation and U.S. aid. Same old, weaponizing life. Given Franson's extensive background in the murky nexus between the military, humanitarian NGOs, and diplomacy in conflict zones, some may find his foray into the realm of biotechnology odd. Yeah, maybe. Definitely odd unless you realize that that's where this is all driving to. However, Franson's approach toward biotechnology, specifically Oxitec's gene drive technology, as they point out rightly in this article, and this is a really important point to understand, it is much in keeping with the steady militarization of that industry, thanks to the work of the Pentagon's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, and its biotechnology office. Right? I mean, and they point out the revolving door between all of this stuff. And that's not whether we're talking the Pentagon and biotechnology or big pharma or anything. The revolving door of this political system is a joke. But the militarization of all of it is happening right in front of you, right? Because we're at a war with COVID-19, right? Franson's conflict zone mentality can be clearly seen in his use of militaristic rhetoric regarding how Oxitec's genetic modified mosquitoes can be used to fight disease. And you'll see a similar note right here. It says during Zika virus scare, he argued in an op-ed in Reuters that, quote, "We need to fight Zika the way the governments fight terror." Are you seeing a common thread, guys? stating that, quote, the same sort of well-crafted U.S. government-led strategy that was designed to combat transnational terrorism is needed to blunt this deadly mosquito trend. Yeah, that thing that just disappeared randomly one day, right? Now, totally. Sure glad we mobilized the military or whatever you want to make it out to be. Yeah, you know, the strategy that was working to fight terrorism, because we can clearly tell how well the war on terror has worked, right? But at the time he said that, it was obvious the war on terror was a failure, and he was still pretending like it's a good strategy because that was what he was told to do. For instance, militaristic rhetoric with respect to life sciences and big push for Oxitec to enter the public health and agribusiness sectors mirror the pivot made by the U.S. military, right? Specifically DARPA, as Whitney's articles have continued to outline in recent years. Indeed, through Oxitec is the best known private sector vehicle for gene drive technologies. DARPA is actually among the top funders of gene drive technology worldwide, having poured $100 million of research into it by the end of 2017. Now remember, we mentioned this stuff way back in regard to the GMO foods. Monsanto, right? The old idea about the Terminator gene. This is a similar concept that I argue they were testing on us then. And now it's developed into the real live human stage here. That's my take. As they point out, the Insects Allies program, remember, this has been going on for a while. And independent scientists openly spoke out about this in the journal Science and said that what they're doing is a bioweapons program, right? Well-respected people. You know why you didn't hear about that? Because they didn't have any excuse for it. They just pretended like they didn't say it. Well-respected scientists, I think there was at least, 15 to 20 of them, all spoke out and wrote this entire letter and said the U.S. government is using weapons to create bioweapons against their enemies. No, we're making insects with viruses to fight food insecurity, even though everything they've ever done to fight food insecurity has in fact made it worse. Probably because that was their intention. As you probably should be beginning to see, the train that everything they do here, the continual thread here is that it's all about the guise of philanthropy, the guise of helping people that ultimately amounts to taking life, removing it, suppressing it, stopping it. In addition, it says Target Malaria is partnered with Uganda's Ministry of Health, much like the Pilgrim Africa, which tied to Gates as well, and is mostly funded also by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and as well as Open Philanthropy, a fund backed by Facebook co-founder Dustin Moskovitz. Open Philanthropy's involvement is notable as they're also a major funder of the biodefense think tank created by Health and Human Services Assistant Secretary of Preparedness and Response, Robert Kadlec. Well, what do you know? Big surprise. It's the same people. So now we have a Gates tie to Kadlec in the same way, but we already did, but in regard to this specific topic. Open Philanthropy, a major funder of the think tank created by Robert Kadlec, which was designed to spread and push these ideas, as well as the Johns Hopkins Center for Health and Security, the same group that was sitting at the Table 201 event. They have deep ties to the 2001 biowarfare exercise, Dark Winter. Guys, it's just too obvious to see. With Franson's ties to the U.S. military, the State Department, and covert regime change networks of both the public and non-profit sectors, it's worth considering that the implementation of Oxitec's gene drive technology for a variety of insects serves as a private sector vehicle for the propagation of this weaponization of life. The weaponization of life. That's what has to stick with you. That has been a focus of the military and its cadre of political operatives and quote-unquote philanthropists in recent decades. Perhaps even more alarming as they end, however, is the fact that many of the most prominent funders and promoters of insect gene drive technologies, DARPA and Bill Gates, are also the most ardent backers of the mRNA and DNA vaccine candidates for coronavirus, as well as coronavirus treatments that directly edit human genes in vivo. We've talked about all these. So is it just coincidence that the thing that they're trying to promote and use in regard to fighting mosquito viruses just so happens to be the exact same thing they're trying to use in these viruses to fight as well? As always, guys, it's an agenda that they're fitting in with whatever excuse is in front of you. Given that Oxitec's longtime owner, Precigen, which we talked about, has become laser focused on gene editing technologies for use in humans as opposed to insects, it increasingly seems that the use of these experimental and untested technologies are intended to be much more far-reaching than anybody realizes. The tie-in, the connection between all of it just cannot be ignored, guys. Weaponizing life. I mean, that's like next level sinister. Think about the idea of weaponizing resources, weaponizing the things they've already been doing. Now it's at a point where they can just turn a switch. We just talked about the geoengineering aspect with Derek Brose in his article yesterday or the day before, right? I mean, another thing being funded by Bill Gates in part, which is used to suppress the population. Right? We have studies coming in across the board that show that this is actually hurting things, as well as the fact that we have people around the world that are accusing foreign countries like Israel of using this technology, as other scientists have already suggested they've already weaponized. I think 2015 they said that, to hurt Iran and their countries and remove their rainfall so they don't have crops. We're going to pretend like they wouldn't do that? We know they have the ability to. And now it's all coming together in all these different ways. Now here is an interesting tie-in that just like the next day, fact check, genetically modified mosquitoes are cleared for release in the United States, which is interesting. And what I find interesting about this article in general is that they're not necessarily, and here's Oxytec right here, they're not actually, I'm surprised by this article and how what they're saying is essentially like they fact check and say, yeah, it's happening. They say, yep, this is happening. And yep, the people are really upset about it. I was actually pretty shocked about the way they presented this article. But maybe there's a reason for it. We'll have to find out later down the line. But even the mainstream media said, yep, it's real. They're releasing these mosquitoes and nobody wants it to happen, but they're doing it anyway. It's pretty much what the article says. So credit where credit is due at the end of the day. But I argue there's probably a reason for it. But it doesn't end with just these mosquitoes. Right now, what I want people to realize is more than anything since COVID-19, this whole illusion has began, we have seen so many different things rapidly increase in speed. All across the board, whether it's AI, surveillance, the next level technocracy medicine, injectable nano platforms and all this stuff. It's all of a sudden, it is like next level. It's on, and they're all justifying and saying it's because we're trying to protect you. Well, no, there's trillions of dollars invested in all these technologies, and they're just trying to push it forward. And it's not just mosquitoes. It's not just geoengineering. It's not even just vaccines. Here's something that will really, it's uncomfortable. Like to see that this is even happening. It just makes my skin crawl. This is a great video. As always, hope you watch in full. Gates invests in lab-made breast milk. That's actual bio milk with a Q. Disgusting. I mean, it is outrageous to me. But I want to play a clip. It's a good size, about 5 minutes. I want to go through this clip. And as always, James Corbett and James Evan Pilato were doing a hell of a job on the show. I mean, if you are not watching their weekly show, you're doing yourself a disservice. They're always well-sourced, always objective, always intelligent. You may disagree with them. There's times when I think I have a little different view. But I know, let's put it this way. It doesn't matter what their intentions are because the data's below and you can look at it for yourself, just like this show. So look it up. Oh, this guy 2 years ago said this about that thing and now he just screw him. He's canceled, right? Okay, well, that's intelligent. How about the link below which proves what he's saying, right? It's like people are crazy. But bio milk. This is, just like he said, removing real things and giving you things that are not. Let's watch this clip. Something that hopefully will stick with you. And remember the things we already talked about and how it ties into all the other agendas, including the idea of, gene extinction, life manipulation.
The other bit on this part two, the other bit of gross news from the Food World Order, Alt Breast Milk Company, which should have you worried just in those 3 words alone. Alt Breast Milk Company, BioMilk, raises $3.5 million from Gates investment firm. Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods, 2 of the most well-known companies disrupting the food ecosystem, as this lamestream article notes. Now the pipeline of alt food companies include BioMilk, and it is spelled BIOMILQ. And when I referenced this on the morning show this morning, James, I noted, much like the cereal Fruit Loops that spells it FROOT, there's 0 fruit in that cereal, and there ain't no milk in this BioMilk. That
made me laugh. I wanted to quickly point out, I think he might actually mention this it's important to remember, I believe he does, but he touches on Nestle. Remember something that we've talked about on this show before. I actually did an entire segment about this. There was a point, and I think it was in Africa. I do remember he does mention this. In Africa, I think it was in Africa, they tried to force artificial breast milk. In fact, and this was coming directly from the US government. They were trying to force this through this company, and in the argument that it was healthier for the babies. That the breast milk was more dangerous, and that the artificial thing they created was somehow was healthier and safer. And that's just simply not true. And it was later, laughably shown to be false. But nonetheless, our government was trying to force, just like they used to do with the banana companies in South America, where they sent the military in to fight for corporations. It was the same idea, right? So just realize that here we are again, another stage later, and now we've got biomilk. There's an agenda here, guys. There's something to it.
At FROOT, there's zero fruit in that cereal, and there ain't no milk in this biomilk. A North Carolina-based startup targeting infant nutrition by attempting to reproduce mother's breast milk in a lab. Biomilk just earned the backing of the world's top investors, raising $3.5 million in funding from Breakthrough Energy Ventures, Bill Gates' investment firm that's focused on climate change. Breakthrough Ventures investing coalition includes Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Richard Branson, Michael Bloomberg, and more. A real rogues gallery of just sort of the New World Order, Illuminati super friends, as they like to call themselves. Biomilk co-founder CEO Michelle Eggers, a food scientist who worked on the Larabar at General Mills, which of course has the convenient initials of GM, before moving on to business school and then, of course, a stint at the Gates Foundation. She and her co-founder, Leela Strickland, who I couldn't find anything out about, hope that the breast milk produced by Biomilk from culturing mammary epithelial cells will help reduce the carbon footprint from the current global infant formula market, which Fortune Business Insight says will surpass $103 billion by 2026.
So if at any point, it's always, we are continually getting fed with this idea about the collective over the individual, right? That we're nobody's safe until we're all safe, right? Well, it doesn't matter if it's more healthy for your baby and has just untold benefits that we can't even explain. And I'm not even going to get into that today in regard to breast milk and the natural aspect there, even in regard to the natural cannabinoids in the milk. And I mean, so many things I've gone over. But what they're saying is that even if it's more healthy and is just unbelievably better for your baby, if it's going to hurt the climate, and based on our models that are continually shown to be wrong, we're gonna have to just remove it, and now it's illegal. Right? Now you're not allowed to do that. Which I know, that's crazy, Ryan. Well, guess what? This is how it begins. And guess what? We're seeing the evolution logic of one of those kind of ideas right now. Remember all those years ago when they said, they're never going to force these vaccines. They're never going to put they're never going to force you in your home. They're never going to do martial law. Yeah, well, guess what? Here we are. It just needs to happen slowly. The boiling frog, the totalitarian tiptoe. And it comes just like it always does. So think about that. The collective over the individual, even if it's at the expense of you.
Top infant formula manufacturers include Abbott Labs, Danone, and of course, Nestle, which you might recall because Nestle's been in this game for a long time, 40 plus years it's been, since of course they pushed their fake milk on mothers in Africa, which led to, of course, widespread malnutrition.
And I'm glad he said that because I forgot about it. In addition to the fact that it's just obviously less healthy, it caused problems. Right? It actually hurt people. Big surprise. And here we are again. So guess what? As usual, they're testing it out on Africa, right? Just like I think it was France, mainstream media actually let slip, remember? They actually said that live on the air that why don't we should test on Africa, because what do they have to lose? Let's not pretend like that's not the collective perception of our leaders, and they constantly use Africa as their testing ground, as they're doing, again, right now with a vaccine for coronavirus.
Death. You can read just mountains of information about essentially the long-time Nestle boycott. And James, something that popped up on my morning show recently when I was going through this day in history, a decade-old story, Gates grant to fund testicle-blasting contraceptive. And
a decades-old story. So obviously what's important to see here is the longevity. Right? The continuity, the idea that this has been an ongoing, constant plan, effort, multifaceted agenda to essentially just to diminish the population. I mean, how else do you look at this? Like, is it just a coincidence that every single agenda seems in some way to, stop production of or reduce the population? Or, I mean, he openly said that. But we're crazy, right? Because that's just not possible, according to the people in power who are all on the same page and funding the same things and profiting from the same things. But let's just listen to them.
Just really shows everything he touches has to do with limiting life. It is nothing life-affirming. It's all essentially about limiting life, blasting your testicles, stopping life, and this is a eugenics dream, I suppose. Exactly right. Or replacing life, or at least natural processes. Breast milk, who needs that? We need bio milk with a Q. It's like Dr. Nick, 1-800-DOCTOR, but the B is for bargain. Bio milk with a Q. The Q is for quality, or something along those lines. Yeah, I'm not signing up to drink this myself or to give it to my children. Luckily, my children are growing up now and don't need that. But at any rate, I like how you line these stories up because, you have the Monsantos of the world, or Bayer Santos, or whatever they are called these days, paying out tens of billions of dollars for their past mistakes, we'll put it, in the Roundup market. Oops, we caused cancer of all those people, but we won't admit it in court. We'll just pay people to shut them up. And, done. The price of doing business. And with
Which, by the way, if you've been watching this channel, is something we've been saying for a long time. I think it's been primarily around the Wells Fargo discussion, right? But it's the same thing. These fines, whether it's about Wells Fargo repossessing cars illegally or opening secondary accounts without you knowing, and causing veterans to lose their jobs and lose their cars and whatever else, stealing money from you and then paying $1 billion fine, which was this huge unprecedented fine, but then making $20 million that year, doesn't matter. It is the cost of doing business, and they actually work it into their model. They have probably an entire slush fund of billions of dollars that they have set aside for if and when they get caught, or the government choose to make an example of them so they don't look like they're part of it, so they can just pay it out. But if you make $9 billion in profit, what does $1 billion matter? Same thing here. What are we pretending is happening here with Monsanto? So they pay out $10 billion or whatever it was? That's an admission. All they do is pay it, manipulate the courts, as they've always been able to do, and then it just goes away and it all continues on. The cost of doing business, and it's disgusting. And it applies to all the stuff we're talking about today.
Oops, we caused cancer of all those people, but we won't admit it in court. We'll just pay people to shut them up. And, done. The price of doing business. And with the most widely used agricultural pesticide in the world now out there, and it's on the shelves, and it'll never be withdrawn. It's never been proven in court to cause cancer. We just paid people billions of dollars to keep their mouths shut, done. And 20, 30 years from now, when biomilk cancers are a thing, they'll be, they'll pay out, and that'll be the price of doing that business, right? But it's a $103 billion market, so, get in while the getting's good. There is, you're exactly right. There is a common theme to these types of investments, either stopping life or limiting life or replacing life. And all of those are eugenical urges. And I think the replacing of natural processes with laboratory concoctions is part of that. And just to add another story to the mix that I actually just came across just as I was researching the things for today, this one from discovermagazine.com. Many BPA-free plastics are toxic. Some are worse than BPA. So there you go. Don't worry, guys, we're taking out the BPA. But what are you replacing it with? Oh, don't worry about that. That's next decade's problem. You'll find out about that when you've already got the cancer from it.
God, it's just the disgusting level of profiteering and lack of concern for your safety drives me crazy. Right, the fact that there are people out there on both sides of the illusion of our system that are fighting for this, saying, no, they're fighting for it's that side that does it. No, it's that side that does it. Meanwhile, they're just raping our country blind. They're just taking everything they want. They're just resources from everybody, right? I mean, they're literally stealing from you and making you sick, and nobody stops it because they can't see past their own party. Like this idea that they can continue to push this down the line, and every single time we continue to see this. I mean, the idea of the BPAs, right? So you're telling me that they don't realize the thing they put in there was more it's probably cheaper. They probably did it on purpose, right? Think about the idea of big oil in regard to Rockefellers, right? Which Corbett himself is the one that really talked about this, right? That big oil at the time, in regard to a Standard Oil, they wanted to be broken up. Right? So the problem, reaction, solution. They created this illusion to make it seem people wanted, we got to break them up. They're too big. No one monopolies. And they broke them up. And instantly, John Rockefeller became the richest man in the world. And ever since then, okay? The point is, it's an illusion. So when they fight to get the BPA, people, we want BPAs removed. And all they do is stick in some other byproduct of some other chemical mining process, just like fluoride. And they jam it in there and say, well, now we're good because it's not BPA. It's sickening. They know this stuff. I mean, think all the way back. There's a movie, Dark Water, right now that you guys should watch, and a real story about DuPont and Teflon and all the realities there that they knowingly got people sick and covered it up and hid it and lied about it and fought in court for decades. And guess what? Nobody ever really got in trouble. And this is always what happens because they're tied to the top. This is the reality of where we are, guys. And if you can't see that, you're choosing to play partisan politics because it makes you feel better. If that's what you want and you're willing to allow this country to burn in the process, well, that's on you. Personally, I'm happy to ignore the political party nonsense to fight for you, regardless of what you think or how you feel. To fight for you as an American, to fight for you as a human being, because that's what should really matter.
So these are the ways these laboratory concoctions go, and if only there was something that we could do. I mean, I get it, not everyone can breastfeed, so how can we possibly provide milk to infants? I don't know. How did humans used to do it? I mean, wet nurses used to be a thing. I don't know.
Right.
But anyway.
Oh no, that's too much homeopathy. No, don't talk. Even though John Ray Rockefeller had his own homeopathic, I mean, it's just, you can't have that, even though that's the most natural and safe and secure. I hate the fact that we make these things that should be natural, normal, and probably the most healthy out to be some kind of archaic quackery. And that also ties back to the same thing. The Flexner Report, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, and their bastardization of the medical processes, the petrochemical medical system. That's where we are now. And they're doing it again today with all of this same stuff, driving us into the new Flexner Report direction with vaccines and nanotechnology. And we'll find out, like James said, 30 years from now, that it's just like we're finding out that the petrochemical system is killing us. Let's keep taking medications while we have natural medicine out there that are constantly causing more problems because that's healthy. Listen to your government. It's the same thing now. We're going to find out just like before. But people will be fighting it just like they are now. That's why we need to try to fight for them. There's no point in trying to fight the government when you have half the people out there standing for that. You need to fight to awaken the people who do not see what you see.
We'll just have to turn to either the labs or use the soy-based or whatever infant formulas that are probably, definitely not nutritious and do contribute to lower IQs and a range of health problems for
Exactly. Let's not pretend like that's not a primary objective there.
infants. But, why bring that up? No, the real problem is carbon dioxide. That's why we have to replace natural human process. Which
was the ultimate point of what they're talking about. The argument is because, the process, it creates more carbon dioxide. It's the same thing. Cows farts, the whole thing. And so what we need to do is attack the breast milk idea, as opposed to, I don't know, carbon fuels. And it's like, no. Let's remove breast milk from the scenario. And let's pretend like oil and all the other things we're doing. That's all okay, though. Let's just remove breast milk. Attack you.
With laboratory concoctions, right, James?
No, that's it. This fits, again, I think, with everything, the powers that shouldn't be, the New World Order, the Brave New World, the Deep State, whatever you want to name it. One of their main, I think, MOs is essentially stealing the real and selling us back some fake version. And they do it in music, they do it in food, they do it in politics, they do it in religion. Every single area, they occult it and give us their sort of fake, phony version.
Yep. Exactly. Right? They're selling us their reality. Right? I mean, at the end of the day, what they're doing is reimagining, re-engineering the world in which we live based on around a control structure that they have access to. That's what this comes down to. As always, I hope you can see, for those that may be new, why, if you're not watching their show, you really should. Doing you a disservice. But here's the actual article they talk about. Oh, whoops, hold on. Have the other thing open still. Artificial breast milk firm that offers an environmentally friendly alternative to baby formula. Like, that's what it's all about. And that's arguably, right? I mean, I would argue, that's a stretch in my opinion to argue that that's going to somehow make any difference. Maybe I'm wrong. I find that to be ridiculous. Like, I mean, again, on top of that, if we're going to pretend like fossil fuels are, not a problem, but let's just remove baby milk. Like, it's just irrational. To get $3.5 million from investment fund backed by Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg. Big surprise. Like, you couldn't have picked three other people that wouldn't have been, it's just perfect. Horrifying, but exactly on the spot. The exact people that you might expect. Now, another point on Bill Gates, before we get into some more foreign policy stuff to end here, is something that I think you might be interested in. And this is just a hypothetical, something that there's actually two parts now that I remember about Bill Gates to talk about, but this is something that you might have seen. And this is just something for you to research for yourself that I figured I'd be doing a disservice if I wasn't showing you this. An 8-year-old girl, her mother, and her grandfather drowned in the new home swimming pool. And you can even see in the picture that it's a standing swimming pool, so not very deep. Okay, here is the article. An 8-year-old girl, her mother, and her grandfather drowned in their new home swimming pool. Well, in general, let me grab this real quick. There's something here that you'll find interesting. There's something in regard to this story, as I'm trying to find the thing that I thought I had open. Here we go. That you may find interesting. Now, this was sent to me by a friend of mine who's a detective. Now, he said it's not particularly uncommon for people to drown when they're trying to save others, right? Which makes sense. Except it's usually in the ocean when that happens, not a standing kiddie pool. So the argument is these people essentially drown while trying to save somebody else from drowning. Now, it says in the article, quote, an 8-year-old girl, her mother, and grandfather found dead in the pool of their New Jersey home died as a result of an accidental drowning. The medical examiner's office said Tuesday. That's suspicious, I have to say. Right? So if somebody falls in and a grown person jumps in to try to save them and they all drown? A mother, a grandfather, and the daughter? Like, am I crazy or does that just sound ridiculous? How do all three people drown in a standing pool? Right? Okay, but going forward, the East Brunswick Police Department said Middlesex County prosecutors, the prosecutor's office, identified the victims as Bharat Patel, 62, his daughter-in-law Nisha Patel, 33, and their 8-year-old daughter. Now, the manner of death was accidental, it says, and the result of drowning. The county medical's officer said Tuesday the family had moved into the home just 20 days earlier. Now, my friend, the detective, the reason I'm not saying, just because I don't know whether or not he would like me to divulge that this is what he was saying, but he says, what CNN fails to mention is that this person we're talking about, Nisha Patel, was the U.S. program officer at the Bill Gates Foundation, and she oversaw $17 billion in federal grants and budget spending under Obama. Now, the three of them died in an above-ground pool that adults should be able to stand up in. So, something to think about. Right? I mean, we're talking about massive transfers of wealth here. Massive. And this is a person who oversaw $17 billion in federal grants under Obama. Grants that in some ways went to groups that Bill Gates was connected to. Now, what could have happened here in a situation where, I don't know, we're dealing with something now where there's a lot of accusation flying around, a lot of concern about where this actually started and who's behind it and what is going on. So to find somebody in a very suspicious way that's tied directly to Bill Gates and $17 billion in federal grants, I just have to say, stands out a little bit. But I'm going to continue to look into it. I'm not sold on this. I think the idea that they all three drowned in a standing pool is laughable. But that doesn't immediately then suggest that Bill Gates is somehow tied to it. He just has a tie to the people. So I would like all of you to consider what's going on here and ask questions. Look into it. Tell me what you find. I personally find it to be very, very suspicious. And I think as anybody right now, knowing what's going on with the ties back to these people and these organizations and that much money involved with federal grants for projects that we don't know, who knows, biotech, nanotech, who knows, right? That any actual investigator should be looking into that thread on whether or not there's some conflict of interest or some kind of something that somebody didn't want to be discussed. I wonder what they knew, right? Interesting. Now, there's another topic that I want to talk about as well that ties to Bill Gates in an interesting way. Now, this is about the idea of Donald Trump. And there's another story in regard to the lawyer that they just tried to fire, or rather, excuse me, the government official they just tried to fire because he was investigating things they don't like. And it actually turns out to be somebody who's investigating a lot of things around Jeffrey Epstein. Doesn't look good for Donald Trump, especially for all those people out there that are arguing that, Trump doesn't have obvious ties to Epstein, which he clearly does. There's something going on there. All of his supporters would never want to pretend that he would cover up what's going on, but there's something interesting there. But the obvious point is there are ties all across the board to Trump and Epstein, Trump and Bill Gates and all these people. Now, here's just one that's not a necessarily direct tie, but it's just one that I want you to consider. Donald Trump created the White House Office of American Innovation, right? March 27th. March 27th, it started. Now, right the day this was announced, they've already reached out to people like Bill Gates. Now, understand, this is Jared Kushner leading this team. So you could argue that maybe it's Kushner, but that, somehow, the idea is that it's always somebody else, right? It's never Trump. So if it's bad, Trump didn't know about it. If it's good, he's the one that thought of everything and led the ship, right? It's a perfect way to never be at fault and always take responsibility, which is what he does. He invites people like Elon Musk and Bill Gates, and they have this big meeting about where this is going. And understand that we're talking about an American innovation, the exact kind of the things we're dealing with today with this technological push. Okay, so right off the bat, the point is that they meet with Bill Gates, Trump's administration. Maybe it's just because, whatever. You can make up any excuse. Doesn't necessarily prove anything. Okay, jump forward to April 14th. Well, they meet with Bill Gates again. For the same group, same idea, White House innovation, but this time they meet with other people as well, such as Bezos and, Mark Zuckerberg. Same kind of people that we just saw tied in with the other idea that we were just talking about. Where does all this overlap we keep seeing? And maybe it's because these are captains of industry or whatever you want to call it. But all I see is that Bill Gates met with Trump's administration twice after they created this group. Then, again, on May 1st, Bill Gates meets with Trump personally. Bill Gates reveals he turned down Trump's offer of a White House science job. This is in May 1st, 2018. Well into Trump's administration. Now, if you're going to pretend like we only now know that Gates is something dangerous because of coronavirus, that just doesn't make any sense. All this information has been there. So if you're going to pretend that Trump does not have ties to this person, it doesn't just begin when COVID-19 started. Okay, so Trump offered him a job. That's something interesting. But of course, this will get ignored, and it may mean nothing. But if you're willing, if you don't know, you can't just pretend like it doesn't mean anything. Especially when you read what they said. Gates did refuse the president's job of science advisor. Imagine that. Now, it says the billionaire Microsoft founder was speaking with health and medicine news site Stat, and he characterized his 15 March conversation with the president as the longest conversation about universal flu vaccine that he'd ever had. The president. Mr. Gates recalled asking Mr. Trump, quote, "You should associate yourself with American innovation. Wouldn't you love to have the universal flu vaccine be something that really got kicked off and energized by you?" We just talked about this idea of the universal flu vaccine. They're talking about genetic modification. I'll show you that again when I'm done here. It says, Mr. Gates said the president was super interested in the idea, but said filing the vacancy of I don't know why I keep misreading these words. Filing the vacancy of director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy was not good use of his time when Mr. Trump offered the position. That has been vacant since the president took the office last January. Now, says the pair has met 3 times since 2016. Okay, so 3 times. I don't know if this was the 4th or this was the 3rd. Either way, he's met with him multiple times, and yet we're going to pretend one, there's no connection, and one, that that Trump sees him as he is because, whatever the narrative is. 3 times. To me, that appears that there's obviously a connection there. It's a tough topic to discuss given Mr. Trump's America First policy, he says, and propensity to say that the U.S. is spending too much abroad, which I think is obviously not what he cares about, as we're doing more than ever. Playing to Mr. Trump's political beliefs, the head of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation said the quote, "The capacity to build the tools that would help you be prepared for a big pandemic." In 2018, he says this, "The U.S. is really the only country that's got a broad set of those tools." So seemingly didn't work out too well for them, apparently, this time around, right? All these tools that we either didn't use or didn't have, seemingly. So even in a totally nationalistic framework, you don't want lots of Americans to die from flu or smallpox or some new pathogen. I didn't put him to the test whether that was the serious thing or not. He probably himself didn't know he was serious. It's a friendly thing. Basically, we're being friends. We weren't arguing. It says the tycoon and global health philanthropist said about the job offer and his vacancy that has left scientists around the country concerned about the White House's decision-making abilities on matters of public health primarily, which seems interestingly tied to today. The last person to hold the position, last part right here, despite that, Mr. Gates said he was interested enough in the idea of a universal flu vaccine that he actually called the head of the FDA, Scott Gottlieb, who, remember, this guy is one of the usual suspects, while Mr. Gates was in the room in order to get his agency's head's perspective. So it's not something, we know Trump is for these vaccines. They wouldn't put Moncef Slaoui in the position, a guy that got GlaxoSmithKline, Moderna guy, in the position if he didn't already support this. That also seems to counter the perception of what they pretend Trump believes. At the same time, Scott Gottlieb is another big pharma obvious plan, but then at the same time, we have Gates meeting with him, talking about flu vaccines, talking about universal flu vaccines, genetic modification, and Trump is all about it, calling the FDA, talking about this, and here's where we are, right? And this is the same idea we just talked about. This is in 2015, the 1.6 billion business of the flu, right? Here is Moncef Slaoui himself talking about this. The holy grail for the flu, researchers say, is to find a universal vaccine that would render making the vaccine every year unnecessary. GlaxoSmithKline's Slaoui, who is right now your vaccine czar, picked by Trump, said he's been thinking about the potential for 30 years. Now, when you go to this article, you realize they're talking about changing the body to look at a different part of the virus so it reacts differently. So when it changes next year, they're only reacting to the part of the virus that doesn't change. They're talking about modifying your body, not giving you a medicine. That's what they're all about. Here's Dr. Fauci saying, yep, 10 years away, which puts us right about now, 8 to 10 years, right now. They're all working on this. Trump's behind it. Gates is tied to it. Everyone's tied to this. So if you're going to pretend like no one is, somehow one person or other is not connected and secretly fighting it all, well, that's a nice adult fairy tale. But at the end of the day, we have all the evidence. And it's all right in front of you. It's just a matter about whether you want to see it or not. Now, to finish, I want you to understand the kind of people we're talking about here. Whether that's, Trump himself or Mike Pompeo or Azar or Kadlec or any other people that he has surrounding him, this just gushing swamp of swamp creatures all around. Here is one person that you really need to see, right? Oh, yeah, keep your enemies closer, because that really doesn't make any sense when they're all enemies. But here's Mike Pompeo saying, on the International Day in support of victims of torture, we honor and support victims and survivors of torture around the world. The U.S. is committed to using all available tools to promote accountability for those who engage in these abhorrent practices. Oh, you mean like you, Mike Pompeo? Yeah, he's actually talking about himself in that tweet. He wouldn't say that, but Mike Pompeo is a huge proponent of torture. And I'm going to show you why. Victims of torture, like all the people that you guys tortured in the CIA at Guantanamo and everywhere else, like the people they're torturing right now in Yemen using the UAE, which we've already proven. Like right now, the U.S. is committed to using all the tools to promote accountability. So you're going to arrest yourself? Are you going to arrest all the U.S. CIA members that are part of all of this? Engage in these abhorrent practices? Yeah, the U.S. government is like the torture. This was a huge part of what WikiLeaks and all these people divulged to everybody. Which is why you're trying to arrest and murder Julian Assange, because he made you look like the torturing murderer that you are. So as I commented, oh, look, at first I actually said, right here, I'll just leave this here. An article said, what's the CIA's torture program looked like to the tortured? And as you can see, I'll show you the articles in a minute. It shows you the pictures. Here's another one. Oh, look, here's another one. A Guantanamo Bay detainee drawings show the brutal CIA torture. Here's one from Human Rights Watch. Trump nominees troubling history on torture. It's everywhere. Trump himself says torture works as his government readies the review in 2017, right? We all remember that. Let's not pretend like this isn't something that Trump absolutely has endorsed more than once. But here's literally Pompeo stupidly pretending like that's not the case. That's his job, is to be the Twitter manipulator. He's out here pumping out nonsense about Syria and supporting people, and while he is stepping around the world and killing people. This is the most disgusting, despicable type of human being, if you even can call them that would act like they're righteous and actively helping people while they're some of the most vile people on the planet. Here's Mike Pompeo is unfit to lead the CIA if he doesn't reject torture. This is before he went on to not reject torture. Remember when that happened? I do. 2017, he sat down and everybody was ready for it. This article came out before he sat down in front of Congress. He is unfit to lead the CIA, which just like Gina Haspel, who is right now leading the CIA, who also has a huge role in torture in regard to Afghanistan and Iraq and Guantanamo. Well, he is unfit to lead the CIA if he doesn't reject it, because he went on to reject torture. He went on to not say torture was bad, if you want to put it that way. But either way, his troubling history on torture, he is a person who is behind it, who has led it, who has supported it. Because they're bad people. But yeah, go ahead and pretend like you're good and saying, let's support the people that we killed and tortured. Let's pretend like we're in solidarity with all the people that we killed their family members and removed their children and, all the good things that we did for freedom. Guess what? Guantanamo is still open because now it's a good thing because all of a sudden Trump supporters pretended it was. The same place where all these things happened, right? The same place where pictures just like this happened, right? And how much you want to bet this gets censored for showing you pictures of what our government did to people? Right? Understand this is not, you can't pretend these are something they made up. We know this happened. We've actually seen the real photos of what happened. And remember that what happened in Iraq and everywhere else where people were told to rape people, were ordered to do things to children. This was proven by their own government. That's where we are, guys. But yeah, go ahead and pretend like you care about it, Mike Pompeo. I'll hold my breath. Right? And here's their allies too. It's not just our own government. Here's their allies. UN warns, because who cares, right? The UN only matters when they're making declarations about people that the US government and Israel don't like, right? So when the UN makes a mandate about Syria, well, they have to abide by it. When the UN does a deal to Iran, well, they have to abide by it. Okay, well, here's the UN saying, well, you're killing people in Yemen. Oh, you be quiet. You hate Israel. Shut up. Right? Like, it's just so stupid how it's one-sided. UN warns many will starve to death, like they already are in Yemen, because the Saudi fuel blockade is still happening. They have never stopped their illegal blockade on the country. Whether there's a coronavirus pandemic or the world's worst humanitarian crisis, they are murdering people every single day. One child dies every 10 minutes because of the US government and Saudi governments and their murdering of people in this country. One child every 10 minutes. Why does that not matter? Politics, that's why. Because it's easier for people to pretend it's not real, so they don't have to confront the reality of who they're supporting. That's called weak. That's called a lack of constitution. As Whitney Webb points out, again, about the same people we're talking about. Hey, remember when the Pentagon used germ warfare against Korean civilians and bombed so many civilian targets that they actually ran out of things to bomb? Honor that memory. That's what they're saying here. Today marks the 70th anniversary of the Korean War. More than 1.5 million Americans served in South Korea's 3-year war on North Korea, which ended with an armistice. Yeah, it never stopped is the point. They're still technically, guys, how disgusting. This is so real, it's easy to find. They carpet bombed. Just indiscriminately until they no longer had bombs. That's the kind of government you're supporting. By the way, they do the same thing now. They just pretend it's for freedom. Back then, they didn't care because they didn't know an internet. Nobody would care. They just had to come back and say, we succeeded for freedom. And yay, right? Because we didn't have anything to prove that they did anything wrong. Here they are. Let's honor when we murdered all these people because we want to rebrand it as some kind of freedom, honor, nonsensical spin. And on top of all of that, to end the show, Trump administration moles, guess what? Ending congressional review of arms sales. So they can continue to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia. So they can continue to sell weapons to anybody. You know, the 70% of the world's dictators that CIPRI yearly points out that they continue to arm as they pretend to fight dictators and fight for democracy. You know, that's the same nonsensical point as fighting for democracy while supporting the world's leading authoritarian dictatorship in Saudi Arabia. Totally makes sense. But let's not talk about that. Trump's administration is talking about ending review of their arms sales. It says it's looking at options, according to the officials, to end a decades-old practice of notifying Congress about their arms sales. Why? Because they sell weapons to bad people. And because people in Congress are calling it out, it's making them look bad. The only way they can function in this economy is by continuing to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia and anybody else. I argue right now, because we're struggling so much, that they don't care. I bet you the reason they're mulling this is because if they want to remove accountability and sell weapons to everybody in the world. Anybody everywhere. You know what kind of financial boon that will be for this country? It'll be huge. But at the same time, they'll also be promoting and arming all the people they'll later point to as justifications to continue fighting the wars. Isn't that perfect? It's kind of what they're doing now. But if they just flood this everybody everywhere with no accountability, it'll create what they've always been trying to create. It appears to be driven by the number of times that Congress has tried to stop it, right? So Congress using its authority and, you know, technically what we're supposed to pretend it is, the representation of America, to stop them and stop things that we don't support. Well, we can't have that, so they're just going to stop it. Right? Is that how democracy is supposed to work? Right? You have this kind of this authoritarian lead executive branch that just says, well, you're trying to hold us accountable, so we're just going to remove that part. Freedom, democracy, right? Most Americans do not want wars. They want to end the wars that are happening. They don't want to start more wars, and they don't want to be selling weapons to people abroad. This country does not want to do that, and we've always been saying that. And all they do is they give us this, you know, they gaslight us into it. They say, well, we're trying. We have to get further in to get out, right? How many times have we heard that? The only way we're going to stop it is if we push in and finish it and leave. Yeah, right. They placate you by pretending that they really want to stop it, and all I'm doing is fixing the problems of the guy before. How long has that been going on? From Bush to Obama to Trump. I'm always fixing the other problems, and it never stops. The only thing that continues is the wars. That's the stagnant, constant war. Who cares what their excuses are? They continue. Yeah, sure, Trump pretends he wants to leave because he knows his supporters think that's what he wants. So he pretends to move people and then puts them back in. He says he's going to leave and then a deal doesn't work. And then, we're going to do this. Then COVID-19 happens or, you know, whatever it is. There's always a reason to not do what they say they're going to do. And the end result, the wars continue, as they always will, until we stop it. So realize when they're trying to stop the review of arms sales, it's because they do not want you to be able to hold them accountable. And that is the last thing that we should pretend represents some kind of government that cares about what you think. And finally, as always, Israel's bombing Gaza. Right now, in the middle of all this, right? As always, same thing. And guess what? You're going to laugh, probably not. Maybe you'll cry because it's the same old disgusting story. Palestinians in Gaza fired 2 rockets, they say. Guess what happened? The rockets fell in an open area and nobody was hurt. Every single time. Can somebody go out there and make a montage of how many times they've reported that? It's probably 1,000 times. Every single time this happens, the rockets fall in open fields and no one was hurt. Every time. And then guess what they do? Well, they fire rockets back. The Israel Defense Forces fired rockets back on Gaza and bomb multiple locations and kill people every time. So the question you should ask is, were there rockets at all? You know why? Because the leading defense expert in Israel has openly said that this isn't real, that the Iron Defense, the Iron Dome is an illusion, that they shoot fireworks and pretend that he said that. That's not what I'm saying. I do believe that. But that's what the leading munitions expert in Israel has openly said. I've reported it twice. I've showed you the article twice. He has openly said that. So why would we not question and ask why? You notice how the article just refreshed right there? Isn't that weird? That's what always happens when I have things highlighted and they have an auto refresh. You know why I think they do that? Because they're constantly editing and changing parts of their article to manipulate things. And they just don't want you to notice that it happens. So you can't have an article up from like 2 days ago and notice that they've changed something. That's my opinion. But you just watched it happen live. I have something highlighted and just refreshes on its own and goes away. But how many times are we going to see this absurd story? Also ask yourself why they would continue to fire things that they know never, ever have their effect and allow them to fire back and potentially kill their families. Does that make sense to anybody? All this does is give Israel the excuse to continue to bomb them and realize it's the same excuse they're now using in Syria. Oh, a rocket just flew from Golan Heights. We just bombed Damascus. Okay, did anybody see the rocket? Is there any social media evidence of a rocket? Nope. Never is. How is that possible? Because it's not happening, guys. That's my opinion. They set off the rocket alarm sirens, people run, and they wait. They probably shoot off a couple of things in a field, and then they fire bombs in Gaza. Places they already had picked. Ask yourself this, do they know for a fact that this is Hamas? No, because there's not been an investigation. They just know, they claim that rockets came, so they bomb things they want to bomb, which is Hamas. Every single time. It's just disgusting that we can see this so plainly. And I know that most people out there who fight against me on this topic, they know that they know what they're saying is not sound. They just know that it's their side and their party, that they're supposed to support Israel. And they're supposed to lie about what they're doing. And they're supposed to, some of them believe it. But there's so much obvious evidence, I find it impossible that there's not a lot of them out there that are just lying for their truth, as I keep saying. As the joke I keep making is, the number one enemy of those Palestinians is those open fields. Every single time they hit an open field, every time. All we hear about is skin, knees, and anxiety. And then they kill 4 people in Gaza with their bombs, and it's Palestinians, they're bad guys. It's disgusting. Even if you think that's exactly what happened, ask yourself how it makes sense to continue to do this during this problem. And then ask yourself why we wouldn't consider that. What if it was Islamic Jihad? What if it was a Mossad agent? What if it was somebody from Jordan because they know that they're trying to steal the Jordan Valley? What if it was any number of people that have an interest in creating something like this? Who cares, right? Just bomb Hamas because that's what they already wanted. Is any of that legitimate? Any of it justified and legal? No, none of it. Double standard is what that's called. If anything even close happened in Syria or Venezuela or any place they wanted to make a deal about it, it would never stop being talked about. I know you guys know that, but I'm going to keep making the points every single time because we are reaching people. We are waking people up. And that's exactly why they're so desperate to force this in, because we are making a difference. Don't ever forget that. You're not alone. You're not crazy. We're all here and we all see the same thing. And it's just a matter of time if we do what we can to stop it before it stops. That's my belief. At the very least, it's wishful thinking because what else do we have to do? We can't just sit back and allow it to happen. So fight. Stand up. Have the courage to stand up for what you believe in. Thank you for being here. I love you guys. As always, question everything, including me. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
يصنعوا فيروس وينشروه في العالم باش الشركات الرأسمالية تحصل أموال. الأمصال لا تباع، الدواء لا يباع. إذا كانت هي تباع بثمن غالي معناها تجارة. اعلنوا قولوا الدواء مجاني. الأمصال مجانية. مش حتنتشر الفيروسات اللي خلقوا فيها باش يعملوا أمصال وباش تكسب منها الشركات الرأسمالية. المصانع تشتغل بتاعت المخابرات.